Okay, thanks everyone for coming into this webinar. We're really excited for this collaboration between Going to Seed and Utopian Seed Project. I'm a huge fan of both of these organizations, so it's exciting to have more collaboration and conversation between them. I'm Spencer. I'm a farmer with Tanager Farm in the Portland, Oregon area. I'm a volunteer on the Going to Seed Advisory Board, and I'm also a grant recipient for their farmer support program. And I'm here to introduce Going to Seed, and then I'll pass it over to Chris. Going to Seed's mission is to provide gardeners and farmers with the knowledge, skills, and resources to grow locally adapted, genetically diverse crops using traditional selection methods enhanced by ongoing learning and experimentation. So to me, Going to Seed is all about spreading the idea of the power of adaptation over inputs in agriculture, the importance of diversity, and also the importance of participation, engagement in seeds and seed work. I really recommend checking out goingtoseed.org to check out the organization. There's a lot of great resources on there. One of the big programs is an annual seed share program. So that's going to open up in just a couple days here on February 1st. And growers can get genetically diverse seeds at no cost. Donations are encouraged. And that's a really exciting program. Also on the website, you can check out some courses that are really great and also no cost. I was a huge fan of the adaptation gardening course and also the Center of Origin course about traditional farming methods in southern Mexico. I just really thought they were some of the best online free content that's available out there. So check it out. And then there's really an active extended community that is active on a forum that you can access through the website. Yeah, it's really fun, and we love to have all of you there. With that, I'll give it over to Chris Smith, and he can introduce Utopian Seed Project and the farmer panel that we have today. Go ahead.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name's Chris Smith, and I founded and run Utopian Seed Project. We're based in Western North Carolina, just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And just to give you kind of like a heads up on the overview of what we're going to do in the next hour or so, I'm going to introduce a little bit about Utopian Seed Project, but I really want to jump straight into this large farmer collaborative adaptation thing that we've got going on that we're going to dive deep into today. So I'm going to give you the bigger picture, eagle eye view of that grant and project that we're running over a 2-year period. But as quickly as possible, I really want to pass it over to our farmers here. I'm going to let them do full introductions once we get into the farmer segment, but I want them to share what it's like to grow diverse crops in a real farm environment. I think that's a big question that we have coming into this, and these folks are helping answer that question. So we'll have about 30 minutes with the farmers chatting, and then we're going to try and hold about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So my suggestion is, with lots of people in this Zoom room, if you could type questions into the chat as they come up, I can keep an eye on them and track and collate them together. And then once we get into that farmer section, then I will ask the questions on your behalf of the farmers, and we can hopefully get to as many things as possible. If there's questions hanging at the end, then I'll leave some contact information, and I'm happy to do follow-up conversations and all that kind of thing. But yeah, just in the interest of time, hold questions to the end or keep them all in the chat, and we'll try to get to them all. Utopian Seed Project. We are a nonprofit, and we are focused on introducing more agrobiodiversity into the food and farming system in our own region, which we define loosely as Western North Carolina, although we do work across the Southeast. So we're trying to get more types of crops into the food and farming system, more varieties into the food and farming system. And then, as many of you guys will know, as you are already engaged in this work through going to seed, we're trying to get more genetic diversity into the crops that are being grown. So diversity at all scales is what we're engaged in. And so the landrace gardening, the grexes, the mixes, the breeding mixes, all that type of stuff, we've been engaging in that work for the last 5 years or so. and generating our own diverse mixes that we are then attempting to adapt to our own low input growing conditions and our environment. One of our goals or focuses is climate resilience. We're very concerned about climate change. Farming feels like it's getting harder and harder as like the weather becomes more and more unpredictable. And so we're attempting to maintain pretty high levels of diversity within our crops so that we can have that kind of adaptive potential season to season as the climate continues to change. So we've been doing this work on our own farms. We've been working locally with folks, distributing seed packets to gardeners and an informal distribution network. We get folks reaching out saying they're growing this, that, and the other all over the place. And something that kept on coming back over and over again was it's one thing for home gardeners to be growing diverse crops, and it's great, and I encourage it. But if we really want to have high food systems impact, then we need to push some of this theory around adaptive crop populations into a farmer network. And we need to get farmers growing more diversity on their farms and then having that go into the food system. From a theoretical viewpoint, we're like pretty solid. There's lots of scientific papers and discussions and examples out there that diversity can give more resilience in food and farming, and that it's something that we're going to need as climate change continues to intensify. But when the rubber hits the road, if it doesn't work in a farm system, then farmers aren't going to do it. Farmers are doing really hard work to grow food, and I fully believe it's like probably one of the most challenging things to do. And to throw another kind of like curveball in there and say, oh, and by the way, your wonderful, predictable, uniform F1 isn't going to be what cuts it into the future, and we need to start working with diversity, then I don't like being punched in the face by farmers any more than anyone else. So suggesting that you do something else or something harder isn't what I want to do at all. So we were fortunate to get a grant through Southern SARE, and they funded, it's a larger grant, but one of the objectives within this grant is to have money on the table to pay farmers to participate in growing a diverse seed population. And I know Going to Seed has run a kind of a similar program, and we've had some good conversations about their experiences too. So hopefully this can be a more of a national learning concept, and this is why we're sharing some of what we've learned with you guys. But this particular grant is Southern SARE, so we're focused on southeastern farmers. And we've approached it with a real just open-minded curiosity more than anything. We put out an open call for farmers to participate. We had a $750 stipend over 2 years, and really we're just asking farmers to grow one of these 5 crops that we've got as a diverse population, to grow it, to save seeds from it, and to grow it again a second year. And then the feedback we're looking for is survey-driven, anecdotal feedback in terms of how was it to grow diversity in your field? Was it really annoying? Did it work really well for you? Did you know realize any climate impacts? Was there any pest pressure? Did your harvest crew mutiny because it's so annoying to harvest different types of crops? When you got it to market, did the customers like it? Were they curious? Were they put off by it? Just these very open-ended questions to try and build a picture of what are the bottlenecks in getting diversity into farm and then food system production. And then as we identify patterns, then we can more readily address them and have an idea of what we're going at. So we're not just working from a theoretical diversity leads to resilience viewpoint. We're saying we know the theory is good. Now, what are the challenges? And hopefully have more farmers telling other farmers that, hey, my customers loved this, or it worked for this reason, but not this reason. This is how we're going to address that problem. So that's like where we're coming from it as the nonprofit managing this grant. And we're halfway through right now. So you're speaking to us at the midpoint. We've done one full season. Farmers have saved seeds, and we're getting ready to go into the second season, which for me is the exciting season because that's when they're planting the seeds that they've saved themselves. So that's program overview. To give you an idea of the scope, we had funding for about 50 farmers. And initially I was like, oh, how am I going to persuade 50 farmers to be a part of this? When we put out the call for farmers, it was overwhelming. We had about 150 plus sign up. And we had to make some decisions, and we ended up categorizing people into, we asked people to self-select to be professional farmers and then more homesteady type farmers. And we've prioritized the funding to go to professional farmers because we really wanted this to be in real farm systems that were farmers either going to market or serving a community. So we did manage to send seeds out to 150 people. Again, farmers self-selected what crop they wanted out of these five, and you'll hear about some of them from the farmers. And then really throughout the season, we've just had WhatsApp channels and emails to have kind of like ongoing communication. Something I've learned from my end was it was cool that we were able to get these seeds out to this many people, but then we had 150 people to manage, 150 envelopes to fill. All the things just became a very big task in terms of the size of these cohorts. So we've done our best to continue communication and support of all the growers. And there's been a natural funneling. And at the end of the season, we did a big survey to try and get information back, and we're working through those right now. But I got about 80 responses. So 150 active growers, and then whittled down to about 80 responses that I know for sure have told me that they're going to take seeds into the following season. So I feel pretty good about that return rate, and I'm excited for year two. And I'm sure we'll have a lot more to share once we get to the end of this next year in terms of that ongoing experience as farmers get to see in real time what it means to save seeds that are adapting to their own soils and climates and farming preferences. Okay, I'm sure that's triggered some questions. Drop them in the chat and I can circle back to the end if there's any clarifying questions around like the process and what we're all about. What I want to do now is switch to the main chunk of this, and probably who you really want to hear from is three of our 150 farmers that are in the room with us, two from North Carolina, one from Tennessee. I'm gonna just let them introduce themselves and their farm, just like a minute or two from each of them to give you an overview of their own farm operations, and then we'll dig a little bit into the meat of what actually went on last year. Jamie, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Swafford. I am owner. My wife and I own and operate Old North Farm. We are in Shelby, North Carolina, right in the foothills, about halfway between Charlotte and Asheville. I am a recovered chef. I cooked professionally for almost 2 decades and returned to the farm that I grew up on to grow food for chefs. That journey has taken a lot of turns, but the location itself, our farm is 3.5 acres. We have about 1 acre's worth of beds on that farm, and a fifth of those, we have 100 beds, and 20 of those are under cover. So a lot of field growing. We grow 4 seasons of the year, and we also have an on-farm bakery. We do markets. We do farmers market. We supply food hubs and work with chefs and restaurants in 2 different major cities. And above and beyond that, we have a value-added product line, and that's it. I guess we'll get it further down the road.
Yeah. Alicia, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Leone, and I'm the owner and operator of Bird Fork Farm. We're located in Dunlap, Tennessee, which is essentially between Chattanooga and Nashville up on the Cumberland Plateau. We've been operating going on 6 years now. And what started as primarily vegetable production, we grow about 1/4 of an acre of various market vegetables, produce, or different types of produce, fruit, and herbs. But we really pride ourselves in teaching folks about wild edible foods too. So we do a lot of forest farming and ethical wild crafting and foraging. We create a lot of value added products and have an apothecary line. I'm an herbalist, and so we do focus a lot on medicinal and culinary plants. We do prefer to grow like diverse heirloom seeds. We are certified naturally grown. We do 3 to 6 markets a week in the Chattanooga area. We sell to restaurants. We have wholesale accounts. We've gone through food hubs, and we recently started a little community farm stand up on our little mountain range area to help increase the access to food for our rural neighbors. We do have about 3 acres of orchard space too, and have just been looking to really save more seed on the farm, but also diversify our crops. We are a very diverse farm. We have too many baskets going right now, but that's a little about us.
Thank you. Leonora? You're on mute, Leonora.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leonora Steffanile, and I manage the Dr. John Wilson Community Garden in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And we have an acre in annual vegetable, cut flower, and medicinal herb production. About half of that is true production style, and the other, a little more than half, is actual community garden rental plots. And as the manager, I work closely with the people who are community gardening with us to share the best varieties of vegetables and other crops that work well in our area. I have a background in farming. I was managing Highgate Farm in Marshall, North Carolina before I was here, doing diversified vegetables. And we also, at the community garden, we, in our production style, everything that we grow goes back to communities. So we donate all of our food either to volunteers who help grow the food, and then whatever is left from that goes to Bounty and Soul, which is a nonprofit food distribution hub, basically, who donates via no-cost markets throughout Western North Carolina. We've also given to Equal Plates Project, which provides cooked meals within the Asheville area. So we're a growing for donation farm, essentially. And community gardeners also are required to donate 10% of what they grow for donation as well. So it's true community growing. We also have a community-wide composting program. We have about a half acre worth of orchard space. We maintain, we have several conservation project initiatives to steward the neighboring riverbank that we share with the Swananoa River. And so we cover a lot of ground in terms of programming. And I was attracted to the Utopian Seed Project's offerings and being a part of the SARE grant project because I've just seen as a farmer how intense climate change really is affecting farming, and the idea of these hyperlocal, adaptive, regionally adapted varieties seemed really relevant and an important thing to be considering as an entity that is trying to grow food for a community. If there's anything we can do to increase yield or to increase the ease of growing crops, then that's something I think was really worth looking into. And yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly jump in and just give you super quick background of the crops, and then we'll go back around and find out how these farmers handled growing the crops. So I referenced 5 different crop types. We had a southern pea, a pole bean, a cupboard type squash, an okra, and a collard. And they were all like highly diverse populations. They're all at different stages, and we're not going to get into the technicalities of all this today, but just very briefly, collards are obligate outcrossers, so they're like highly promiscuous in the sharing of pollen. And we've been working with the collard population since 2020. So our collard ultracross, we call it, is very mixed up. Our squash population, we've been working with since, oh, sorry, I've got pop-ups. Our squash population, we've been working with since 2023. Also, not an obligate outcrosser, but heavily outcrossing. We started with a smaller amount of parents, about 6 different parents, but most of those parents were land racers. So again, the Hubbard squash population is quite diverse, and we're a few years into it. So we're seeing a lot of like segregation and recombination there. We're not going to talk about the pole bean and the peas today, but obviously they're interesting ones because they're both highly selfing populations. That's a different conversation. And then the okra is first year after the cross. So we took 32 of my favorite okra varieties only in 2024 allowed them to all cross-pollinate, and then we shared the seeds for the 2025 grow out. So the okra is earlier in its journey, and okra, depending on how much pollinator activity you have, outcrosses between 10 and 30, maybe 40%. So less outcrossing with the okra, and we're earlier in the population, but really good parentage. Just wanted to give you that background before we jump into talking about those crops. I might go in reverse this way if we want to start with Leonora, but I'm going to split the questions in two. The first bit, I want to look at production and on-farm, and then when we go around again, we'll look at kind of culinary market, customer type stuff. So, Leonora, if you want to just dig a little bit into the experience of working with a diverse population in your farm system.
Sure. We did 2 crops this summer for Utopian Seed Project. We did the Maxima mix squash, which is like a lot of Hubbard type squash, and we also did okra. The Hubbard squash I was very impressed with because they were very vigorous. You would see runners easily and quickly start to send out roots, which is really good for squash spore pest resistance. And I was seeing in other areas of the garden, squash spores were impacting summer squash and even the butternut squash. Some people weren't yielding as much as they had. And it was just a very intense squash borer year for us. And the Maxima mix from Utopian Seed Project just went right through that, to the point where the original plant root, where the original plant had been like that, those roots, that part of the plant was completely dead, but the runners were still alive and able to keep the squash that was on those runners maturing long after the kind of like original root and part of the plant had died. So I'd never seen anything that vigorous with winter squash before. So that was very impressive. And we were able to get a very nice mature harvest of squash. We ended up with 860 squash, and that was just starting with like a 100 row foot that was allowed to kind of sprawl quite a bit. But getting 800 plus pounds of squash was really exciting and was very well received by the community gardeners, and all the education and volunteerism, and being able to show something like that was a huge success for us, which is a bit more of that's a qualifier, as well as how the food tasted and the kind of farmers market aspect. The okra did really well, beautiful colors and very nice taste pretty much across the okra crop. There was some difference in heights from the different plants, but that didn't really make much of a challenge for us, being on the scale that we're at, and that we're not only focused on production. Some of the height differences may have been different if we were growing like a much larger amount of okra, but since we were only growing, I think, like 50 feet of okra, it was no big deal. And I found the taste of that okra to be a lot better than some of the like seed company bought varieties I've been working with in the past. And it was just both were very successful crops. So from a production standpoint, I was very pleased with both.
Thank you. We can reverse the circle if you want to go, Alicia.
Okay, we grew the okra as well, but I'd actually grown the Utopian Ultracross collards on my own previous years, and they're currently in the garden as well. But I'm going to talk primarily about the okra because they just blew my mind this season. We planted about 150 feet, and before we had received the seeds, we actually had planted out a little bit of just like the Clemson spineless okra, and it performed so poorly. Those plants actually died right next to the Utopian Ultracross when we got those in later, and they just were so much more vigorous. We had some plants that got to be about 13 feet tall, which was really hard come harvest time for those ones, but they were so flexible, it was fairly easy to pull them down to harvest. Because we're so small scale, like that was one of the drawbacks that I could see, where harvest time is maybe a little bit more varied just because of the diversity, but it wasn't really an issue for us. We primarily worked with the okra by making pickled okra and pickled okra juice and selling it in a value-added product base. And while we were fermenting the okra, we would lose a lot of the color into the juice itself, but you still got to see the diversity in the shape and the sizes. We're stuffing jars with some okra that was just so extraordinarily long, but still so tender and delicious. So it was really exciting to hear customers' reactions to that. But in terms of growing, it had very minimal insect pressure. I feel like the staggered nature of the plants coming in was actually nice because it gave us a longer harvesting season. We had a really wet summer, so I'm curious to see how next season, how those saved seeds might dry up if it's a drier season. But we put pretty minimal attention into like fertilizing or anything with them, and they performed really well. Let's see, some cons that I did feel like I noticed was certain genetics would just get woody faster than others at a smaller size. So it was a little harder to judge harvesting with that. But in the seed saving process, we opted to not save as much seed from those plants just because it was harder to get the crop before it went woody. Another way we worked with the plant is that we actually were knocking the bottom leaves off after we were harvesting the fruit, as folks typically do, but we were putting those leaves into our herb drying room, and we've been adding them into our tea blends because they go into some of them. And so it was really cool to have that genetic diversity in those leaves, just based on texture, feel. And I'm really like, my intuition is saying that because of that genetic diversity, it's going to be a wider medicinal property type tea, because it's not just one variety of okra leaf that went into it. So I found that really interesting, and I was so excited working with them. I can't wait to plant them again. Didn't really have very many cons.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's cool. So last summer I grew out the okra. I was a part of the okra cohort, and I grew about 400 feet of the ultra cross, and I was able to select seed from both the shorter plants and the taller plants based on flavor. So I'm interested in the second year of separating those two gene pools out and growing them separately to see how they do. I want to talk about the collards. I've been growing the Ultra Cross collard since the beginning, I believe. It started off as a 21 heirloom variety trial. And I was part of that original trial. I grew all 21 varieties out. In that winter, we had a drastic weather event. It was like 60 degrees in the afternoon and dropped to 18 degrees into the teens. And everything, like I had all the kales and everything in the field were just toast. They just got fried, but those collards were just dancing. And so I knew something was special there. And then the next season, Chris had let those go to seed, interpollinate, and then the Ultra Cross was born. And I've been growing that Ultra Cross and selecting my own. I think it's gone out into purple dominant and then also just the original gene pool. But what I love most about that crop is the flavor. It is like resilient. It's beautiful. It I don't cover it in the winter. We harvested this week out of the ice and it was good to go. And now I'm to the point where I can pull plants that look and taste and feel like what I like, and I can dig those up, pot them up together to try to parse out my own varieties in that. I'm really liking like a green leaf, purple stem with ruffles around the edges. That's a really beautiful one to me, and I'm trying to just pull that out of the mix. And I think that is one selling point. If flavor doesn't get you, like just the control and the independence that you can create your own journey down the road. I think that as farmers, that scientific, like putting the theory to the test, excitement that keeps me growing and keeps me interested. And then at market, we do tastings at market. The okra, we did okra tastings in the middle of the summer, and the first thing people are like, "You're eating raw okra?" But then they taste it and they're like, "Oh my God, why have I not been eating raw okra?" And then they feel like they're part of the journey as well. And the same thing with the college. People are like, oh, what is ultra cross? And you get to tell the story. And those things, like it's eliminating my reliance on large seed companies by producing my own seed or getting them from smaller local seed companies. It is like giving me direction and focus in the growth of that. Yeah, and my community has responded very positively on all of those crops.
You didn't mention that you're supplying Michelin star restaurants with ultra cross collards.
And they're blown away.
Thank you, Jamie, and everyone else. That was fun to hear. I've spoken to these guys before, but yeah, I like the way you explained that, especially the idea of engaging in your own story. I really feel that's something I've been reviewing all the feedback from everybody, and the concept of being part of a larger community and engaging on a more relational level with the crops in terms of having that agency to say, actually, that's the okra I like, or that's the collards I like, and that's what I'm going to save seeds from, and beginning that journey or encouraging that journey to develop a very personal relationship that then creates the story that you can share with your customers or have your customer engage with the story if they're doing that kind of real-time tasting feels like a really powerful way to, yeah, just have more buy-in into that food system. So I appreciate you sharing that. Two things that popped into my head that I'm going to quickly reference as you all were talking. One, tall okra. We've had issues with tall okra in the past because it can be really annoying when it gets mega tall. And when we created this 32 parent population, I actually intentionally did not include any okra that got super tall because I didn't want a whole bunch of super tall genetics. So having heard multiple folks say, hey, some of the okra got really tall, that feels like a real easy to identify community goal because some of this stuff happens on farm and some of this can happen in community. So we could put the word out to all the ultra cross okra growers this next season to say, hey, can you save seeds from the ones that aren't tall and then pool a small okra population. So that's one direction that we could take this as a community to actively select against those tall ones. Or if you're like Jamie, you could just have a tall population and a short population and just go down both rabbit holes. And then the other thing, and I was hoping maybe, actually, Leonora, you might not be able to speak to this, but you grew the squash population. And one feedback I've had from other growers that I think is really interesting and was a light bulb moment in my brain, even though when I say it, it's going to be really obvious. Some of the folks that were growing the squash and taking it to the market had a really hard time selling it because with okra and collards, you can look at it and go, okay, that's as a single pod, and I can see what it looks like, and I can know it's probably going to taste okay, and I'm going to buy 20 of them anyway, so it doesn't matter if one of them is maybe a little off. But trying to sell a 5, 8, 10 plus pound squash and have a customer say, oh, so what's it taste like? Or how is it going to be a good pie squash? And then basically being able to say, I have no idea what's going to be under the skin. I absolutely cannot tell you what's going to happen with this squash. Makes it really hard to sell squash at market, especially when you're probably just selling one of them. So from the customer's perspective, the feedback I got was that it was a risk that they weren't willing to take. They wanted to know that it was a sweet and tender butternut or a good storage, nuttier Hubbard, and they didn't. But the randomness was challenging. So that's just one observation from other growers. I want to go around the circle again. You've all touched a little bit already on the kind of like customer interaction. If you've got more to say there, I'm happy to hear more about how your customers responded to diversity or how you navigated those conversations if you got more to add. But my extra question here that I think would be worth covering is how was the seed saving aspect of the project? Because that's another barrier I think for farmers is to have the time, capacity, skill to allow that row to go to seed or whatever it may be. I'm curious how you got on with the seed saving. And then if you got extra customer interaction stuff, I'd love to hear that too. We haven't started with Alicia yet. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. Like I said, because we put a lot of it into value added product, folks weren't visually able to see like the color diversity as much, despite this genetics having like extraordinarily color diversity. But they would get attracted by the pink pickled okra juice. We were doing shots of pickled okra juice at markets as like a gut healthy thing, and it was creating a conversation. And It actually was a hit around Halloween. We called it unicorn blood. And the times that we did sell it on the markets, because we do some online markets, so it's hard to get feedback from those customers sometimes, but we were noticing a lot of repeat orders when we were putting it on the online market. So I think folks were enjoying it. The few times I did take it to our in-person markets that were in Chattanooga and the larger city, it was really well received. Folks were just astonished by the amount of diversity, the color, the variation, the size and shapes, and even the fresh raw eating. It is so sweet and flavorful. It was fun to show folks that you can actually just eat them raw. And so there were quite a few folks that approached us at market that were just astonished and went through that educational process with us a bit too, and learning about this diversity. And that was really exciting. We did notice it was a little harder to sell in our rural markets, but we think it was more so that folks grow their own okra nearby us. So they have their own little homestead gardens. Those crops they weren't really looking to buy, and were maybe like looking for a little bit more uniformity, maybe a little more hesitant to break out of their norms. We actually submitted the okra to our county fair this season, and they had a green category and a red category, and that was it. And so that was hard trying to select ones to input into that. And so in the green category, I was like, I'm putting the most diverse looking ones of green. Some had a little bit of red tinged in there, and it did not get a ribbon at all. They picked the most uniform, bland looking okra for the green, but the Ultracross actually won the red ribbon. So that was pretty fun. But even for the county fair, like our small rural county fair was like, we want to see uniformity and that nature. I think it just depends on your market, really.
Sure.
I did want to say real quick too, Jamie, you mentioned how the collards have been much more resilient to the freezes and stuff. I've noticed that with them as well. And I'm probably not going to keep covering mine if yours are holding up just fine where you're at, because why do that? But yeah, my other brassicas had like self-killed when it hit 4 degrees recently, but the collards seemed to be just fine. Even the okra, we got a really late first frost. We got a couple like really light frosts, and they were just unfazed by it completely. But we got our first true frost, freeze, and snow all in the same day. And I had gone out that morning, and there's a 13-foot okra plant with a open bloom completely frosted over, and the plant was fine the next day. And it was just like, what? That's amazing. So to be able to see that, whereas like the Clemson spineless, it just doesn't hold up in frost whatsoever, was really exciting to see. I didn't have too much issue with seed saving, but I've been seed saving just on a personal level for quite a while. I think the hardest thing I found was just like timing. I stopped harvesting a little sooner than I could have to try and save seed, because I was nervous the frost would come early and I would lose that seed. So just trying to judge that timing was a little tricky. But then in the end, I ended up with like over 2 pounds of seed, which is just too much. So trying to figure out that timing a little bit easier, and just like getting more to market, knowing that I have a little bit more time before having to save seed. Yeah. Otherwise, it was actually quite fun. I threw them all in a pillowcase and just stomped on it, and they were good to go.
Awesome. Thank you. It's good to hear another testimony to the kind of the vigor and resilience of the okra population, because it is one of our newer ones, so it's not been as tested in as many places. But we had a grower down in Louisiana that's pretty much said the same thing, in that they had a standard variety. I forget the actual variety. I don't think it was Clemson spineless, but it was something like that. And then they had the Ultracross, and they were down in deep heat Louisiana, and they said the Ultracross just kept on pumping out all the way through, and that the other standard variety just couldn't deal with it and conked out pretty early. So that's good to hear for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty resilient in high winds too. We did experience quite a bit of high winds being on the plateau. The weather is quite all over the place at times, especially fall, early spring. So it was good to see how resilient they were. We didn't have any breakage or snappage, especially with how tall they were.
Nice. I'm going to kick it down to Leonora for the same kind of follow-up question.
Sure. Yeah, to talk about the squash, relating back to what you were saying, Chris, about just like the high diversity of like shapes, color, like visual texture and then also like cooking flavor and texture. The squash was quite diverse, and also some of the green type, there's this like beautiful green type, but it was so thick. It's like you needed a hatchet to crack it open. And if I was selling at farmers market, I could see where that would be a real challenge for sure. What the kind of another challenge that presented itself, and luckily Chris bailed us out and took this on, and Utopian Seed Project staff were able to do this, is basically taste testing and in flavor, cooking texture tasting is an important part in which squash you want to select seed from. So it's for that crop, it's not just, okay, how am I going to harvest the seed, do the logistics of seed saving? It's also like, how do I evaluate which ones I want to save seed from? And so Chris's crew actually did like a taste test where you take like a little slice basically of the nice looking squash that came from plants that had high vigor and did really well in the field. And then we're doing this additional layer of flavor testing. And then the best of those was what they saved seed from. And that is tricky because if you want to, we treat our production and the giving to Bounty and Soul very much like like they're a wholesale buyer, and we want to adhere to all the same food safety regulations. So we needed, if we were going to sell squash or give squash away that had been cut open for the purpose of taste testing and seed saving, then we would need a commercial kitchen to do that, which luckily Chris's crew had, but that's not necessarily something that I had access to as a community garden manager. So that would have been, some farms have commercial kitchens on site or access to one, and certainly not all of them do. But if you want to cut squash open, wrap it, save the seeds, do the taste testing, and then sell at market that squash, that would have been a potential challenge. A workaround could be that you give that squash you sell it wholesale to a bakery or a restaurant, and then they might be willing to let you do the seed saving in their kitchen, and then you take the seeds and they take the squash. And that's what we ended up doing. Chris processed the squash, did the taste testing and the seed saving in their commercial kitchen at their farm, and then they gave the halved squash to Equal Plates Project, who turned that food into no-cost meals for the region. That worked out really well. Thank you, Chris. If we had to figure out all those logistics on our own, that definitely would have been a challenge for us, just given our lack of facilities and also the wide array of programming that we're trying to do. And on the other hand, we did save the okra seed ourselves, and that was really cool. It's a much simpler process of selection and also of the actual seed saving. And it was very engaging for like our volunteer base and our community gardeners. It generated a lot of interest. And something that occurred to me through that process is I don't have a ton of background in seed saving. Like I'll save a little bit here and there for myself, but I haven't really applied seed saving on like a production level within a system I've managed prior to now. And it's just like, you have to balance, I think of it as the seed saving is adding a ton of value to the operation and also the crop in the way that like Jamie was talking about, or where it's like you can now really generate these like stories and this connection with a certain plant and crop and genetics, and you can have that be a part of your farm story. I think there's a lot of value there. And it's valuable also because you're potentially creating more resilience on your farm. And we decided as a community garden that like we want to invest in the value of seed saving, which includes investing more resources. So from an efficiency standpoint, maybe, it would make sense to not seed save because it's easier just to buy things from the seed catalog and then just focus on growing the crops. But we want to add value and use the resource of time to do some of our own seed saving on a more production scale moving forward, because that value is worth investing the time into, basically. So that's how I've figured out, yes, this is somewhere where we want to go deeper with this growing for donation program. That's how I'm like justifying it to my base, I guess. And everybody's like really on board with that. And I think that the storytelling element of seed saving has really far-reaching effects that I could talk more about, but yeah, it's a really rewarding process, and it's worth the extra time is my takeaway.
Thank you. I think Leonora highlighted something that I've learned through this process with so many people doing this. And again, it's a pretty obvious thing to state, but if you're gonna jump into one of these projects, then it's worth thinking about is whatever trait is important to you in terms of selection, then there's a huge difference between making selection in the field. Is this okra plant tall? Yes, I don't want to save seeds from it. No, let's save seeds from it. Do I like the color of the okra or the frilliness of the collards? Yes, I'll save seeds. No, I won't. In-field selections are easy. You can flag the plant and say, I want seeds from that plant. But there's a whole bunch of traits that you sometimes can't evaluate until post-harvest. And that's what we experienced with the flavor assessment of the winter squash, and it just makes everything more logistically difficult. It takes a lot more time and management, and obviously squash flesh texture and flavor it's incredibly important if you're going to take a squash to market, that you can have some level of confidence to say this is going to be a good tasting, good texture squash. And if you literally can't assess that trait until after the fact, then I see why that's so hard. And one of the reasons we were more than happy to step in was like Leonora grew 860 pounds of squash. It was an amazing opportunity to take that squash and make really aggressive flavor selections. So when we sliced a bit of every squash and we cooked it all and we tasted all of them, and there was a huge range of flavor profiles, some of which were watery or stringy and we didn't like, some of which were just like amazingly like nutty and a great kind of balance between a smooth, coarse texture. It's just like mind-blowingly good squash in there. And so having the opportunity to have a huge population and make selections for just the best of the best really, in my mind, means that the seeds we save from Leonora's squash population, we've kicked them aggressively towards a really good squash. Obviously, there's going to be some not good squash that continue to pop up, and so we'll have to repeat this process for a couple of years, but I think we've really guided it in the direction that we want that to go. I definitely appreciated the opportunity to do that with the squash that you grew. So yeah, keep that in your mind, is what trait are you selecting for? And is that going to be easy or a pain? And go from there. Jamie.
So I will say that I was a little nervous about the saving collard seed just because of the time investment. I'm a market farmer, and that real estate is expensive early spring. We're trying to get things moving. So that leaving those plants in the row space, I was a little bit nervous about doing that the first time. So that left off of one 100-foot bed. We had maybe 250 collard plants in that row. I was able to stake those up. Once they started getting the pods on, they get a little heavy. So we just staked them up and weaved them to keep them from falling on the ground, and left them there until I think it was early June when they were ready to come out. And we got over close to 5 pounds of seed off of that. So that's something that I wouldn't need to do every single season, but that was that. And then the okra, what I did with the okra, like after the first flush, we did an initial tasting and saw ones that we liked, and we bagged some flowers and kept those there. And then we just started marking pods, letting them continue to open pollinate, and saved those as well later in the season once we could tell the height but we wanted to lock in the ones that we love the flavor from early on. I just don't like the anxiety of late season seed saving because I never know when the frost is coming. Community engagement, like chefs are easy. They want something different. They're always looking for something that no one else has. And if the flavor is there, they're sold. That's easy. The farmers market it's a little bit tougher because people have in their mind what something should be. Tomatoes red, okra is green, squash is yellow. That is the mindset of the average person shopping at my market anyway. But we're able to win these people over, and our community engagement through newsletters, through on-farm events. And I will say that I am a board member on the Utopian Seed Project, so I do have a little bit of an edge as far as like getting plant information out to the people. I do tend to nerd out on all those things and get that out. I did have one light bulb moment this past growing season with the collard population. What we had 3 different plantings. We planted some 1st of July to transplant out, the 1st of August to transplant out, and the 15th of August to transplant out. What we found was when we harvested the first harvest, and we're not harvesting the whole plant, we're just taking outside leaves week by week. The leaf size did not get any larger from the first time we harvested from them. So having that information, what we will do is go back 2 weeks. So we'll probably start our fall collards in the middle of June, in the middle of July, and in the middle of August, so that we can get the larger leaves that folks are looking for Thanksgiving week, for New Year's Eve, or New Year's Day, things like that. We can hit those times with a larger leaf. But yeah, I love this program. I'm happy to be a part of it. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Jamie. I've marked down a few of the questions in the chat, and I'm happy to address them. If folks have other questions, then throw them in. I think we're slated through to 4:15, so I think we can take at least 5-10 minutes of questions without too much hassle. So feel free to ask away in the chat. One that cropped up, I think this is a good question for the panel. Excuse me. The question was basically, do you change your spacing for these crops to either encourage more cross-pollination, so maybe tighter spacing, and does that have an effect on yield if you do that? And also, I feel like the question is relevant from a seed saving perspective in terms of often plants that are going to seed need more space because they get bigger. So do you change anything because you know that you're going to be saving seeds or encouraging cross-pollination? And whoever or everybody or anybody.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I did not change seed spacing on the okra or the squash, nor we also did sorghum, which I don't know if it's technically a USP, but it's from Chris. But I thought I want these to perform well in normal spacing situation. Like I spent some time doing landscaping, and I saw very much how growth patterns will change quickly in a couple of generations if you are giving more space for those plants. And then if you go from a landscaping zinnia and you try to grow it in a cut flower system where you are planting them much closer together, like they're going to be more prone to disease. It's just, you want to grow, in my mind and my understanding of developing genetics, it's like you want to develop the genetics that do well in the system that you're going to grow them in. So I just did normal spacing for everything, and that seemed to work fine.
Anything to add? Go on, Alicia.
For me on the okra, I was so nervous that the plants were going to die as they were coming up that we sowed them with an earthway seeder. They were at probably 6-inch intervals, which is very close for okra. But we did have a little bit of damage from pill bugs at the very beginning. So when they started actually getting to be of a decent size, honestly, the plants were all so beautiful looking. I couldn't thin them. I didn't thin them. So these plants were giant and really close together, but they performed really well. And I think having that pruning practice of taking those leaves off so they ensured good airflow and everything is why we saw minimal issues. We got a little bit of aphid damage later on in the season, but they were placed way too closely together and didn't really seem to have an issue with that. We did have one bed that performed a little better than another one, and that was solely due to the weed pressure getting out of our control in that other plot. So it was interesting to see the differences in those beds, but they were both pretty densely planted.
For me, I don't want to change any systems. No matter what the variety is, we do 15-inch spacing on our okra and we transplant those out so we can get a taller plant in the 1st of May. For okra, for the collards, we do 12-inch spacing and 3 in bed in row. And we don't change that if we're growing flash or whatever variety. I want it to remain the same to see if it performs the same. We just don't change. We don't change anything up from anything that we already do.
There was one question about the results of the tasting that I'll quickly address. When it comes to doing taste testing on like highly diverse populations, then we don't actually, most of the time, we're not actually recording results. Like we record results when we're doing, if we've got 6 different known stable varieties, we'll do a tasting and record results and feel like that's meaningful information to take forward. When it comes to these highly diverse ones, because the genetics are so unstable, then we don't, all we're interested in is carrying the tastiest genetics forward, not necessarily any other kind of value judgments. So we do what we think of as a binary tasting, which also makes it quick and easy when you're dealing with that many squash or any other crop. So Leonora was meant to join us and sadly wasn't able to make it last minute. But so there were 3 of us doing the tasting. And literally, we would just all taste it and give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if it was a thumbs down, that squash went in one pile and we didn't save seeds. And if it was a thumbs up, it went in another pile and we did save seeds. And if it was like oh, I don't know, then or some did thumbs up and some did thumbs down, then we discuss it and have another taste and make a group decision on are these the genetics we want to carry forward because this squash is absolutely delicious. So yeah, no results to share. The seeds are like the results of the tasting in this particular case. And then the very quick follow-on question to that came up from somebody else was, what's going to happen with those seeds from Leonora's squash? And the very short answer is I'm going to give them back to Leonora and you're going to grow them again. I don't know if that was a leading question in terms of people want those seeds because we've done that work. And there are surplus seeds. So that can be a follow-on question. If people want to get in touch with me, then I do have spare seeds. And part of the little deal that Leonora and I made was we'll do this work if we can keep some of these seeds because they're awesome. So I do have seeds to share, and I'm sure Leonora would support that.
Definitely. There's way more seeds than we could use or distribute, probably.
Yep. One question, I'm going to read this out because I think it's a good comment and is a question for the group. Spencer said, it seems like most local communities could benefit from the development of their own local seed hub that could coordinate farmers, provide support, host tastings, events, etc. Seems like funding is the main barrier. Any thoughts on how to fund these kind of projects? And I'm going to tag my own kind of question for you guys onto this is, how important is the funding for you to participate in this project? Because this is a question that I have going forward is I love that we got a grant and that we're able to give you a small stipend to participate for year 1 and year 2. What's going to happen in year 3 and year 4? Are you like, see you later, Chris? Or are you like, oh, this is working, I want to keep saving seeds? Was the money critical for you to engage in the first place? Or that's where I'm going. Like, did this need the grant? Or did it just need Utopian Seed Project? Or were you going that way on your own anyway? Type of conversation.
Yeah, so I think we at the community garden probably would have done it even if we weren't getting paid, just because it's important project. And I knew that it would help bring people to the community garden because there's so much like educational interest around this type of project. And we're in a community that really was deeply affected by Hurricane Helene. So like climate change is very at the forefront of everyone's mind. So if it's, oh, the community garden, we're growing this like climate resilient crops and we're a part of this climate resilient crop research project, people are like, oh, wow, that's so cool. And like those, that generated a lot of interest in the community garden. And it felt like just a very important project for practical reasons as well. And given the fact that we're not hyper focused on the bottom line like commercial farmers, that wasn't so much of a concern for us. And just to address the idea of this sort of local seed hub that does coordination, provides maybe seed saving support, hosts tasting events, etc. I think that's a lovely idea. And I think that it sounds similar to a community garden type of model where it's like a community resource. And there's a lot of, if someone wanted to start something like that, a project like that has to have a champion. It has to have a point person who's willing to do all the sort of administrative and fundraising grunt work and find the funding and create the events and manage everything. But if you find that person, then yeah, I think that could be really great. And I think that funding opportunities like grants outside of just what SARE is providing us to actually, maybe turn it into something like a nonprofit, I think that's definitely worth pursuing. You just have to have someone who makes it happen. And if someone wanted to pursue doing that, I think there's a lot of great resources for how to start community gardens. And I think that you could follow a similar model if somebody wanted to create something like that.
Any other thoughts?
I'll jump in. I would say it like this, Chris. Farming is just full of undervalued skill. And it feels nice to get paid for the work that you do. But also, I don't think anyone who is farming for a living, I don't think that the money is the number one thing. I was able to sell these crops and make money off of them even before any grant payment. But the work is in the selecting, in the note taking, and in that focus, and it's taking up real estate. So it is great. I would have been in either way, bottom line, because I feel that as farmers, we are on the front line leading us into a future with an uncertain climate, and we are working on the food of the future. What are we going to be eating in the next decade, 2 decades? So that is important work. I think it's undervalued, and I'm just glad to be in a community of people who are like going headfirst into this work.
Thank you, Jamie. Any thoughts on this topic, Alicia?
Yeah, the money was certainly nice because farming, you're not rich by any means. So it was like good to have those funds to get the season rolling a little bit, but I would have done it regardless. I'm a sucker for a good science project, especially when it comes to playing with seeds and how you can modify those crops. I think just getting to be a part of this community and like connect with other growers too, and we've had a WhatsApp group to talk with other growers and stuff and learn how everybody's different crops are going. Just having that community there in the first place has been really nice. So yeah, I definitely would have done it regardless of the funds.
From my perspective, having the stipends there makes me feel better about pestering you all to fill in the surveys. So that helps from my perspective. But if it was just a more grassrootsy seed sharing initiative, then obviously you wouldn't have to write a report for Southern SARE to tell them you did this thing, and I wouldn't it could be much more informal than we've made it because we're doing it within this kind of grant program. It could be a smaller group of people that are sharing regionally diverse seeds and adapting and doing seed swaps. And there's lots of great models around seed circles that could adopt seed diversity. I like the community garden idea, like our local community giving garden does seed saving, and then seeds go into the seed library and then other people can take them. I know that Going to Seed has a whole seed library component that I'm not qualified to speak about, but maybe Julian. So I do think there's lots of different connection points to get diversity into the food and farming system, and that don't require as much upfront funding. But I'm also like extremely grateful and still partially surprised that USDA subsidiary Southern SARE funded fairly experimental farming program with a significant amount, right? There's close to, I think there's $40,000 in the budget for this program to be able to pay that many farmers to participate. So a good chunk of money went into this program from Southern SARE, which makes me feel good about Southern SARE not just funding commodity crops. I'm happy with the way they've supported this program. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I had one last comment on my list that came up in my brain that I'm going to quickly reference, and then I guess we'll do a final call and then close it out. One, not from these guys in the room, but one feedback I got from quite a few responses on the survey was some confusion around actually the project in general. So this is probably my fault in terms of communicating, but a lot of this has happened in other circles when we've shared seeds outside of this grant program. When we're working with really diverse seeds and we're saying you can adapt these to your region, you can save seeds and all this other stuff, I frequently get the question coming back to me, like, what am I selecting for? What am I selecting for? What do you want me to select for? What are we selecting for? And in this world, I want to say you can select for whatever you want. You can select for nothing and the environment will select for it. You can select for your favorite color, your favorite flavor. You can select absolutely whatever you want, right? This project is full of potential. And I found that to be like really hard for some people. And I think I don't know if it's imagination or that we're like locked in a system or of uniformity. Like everything in the supermarket is the same. All the varieties are uniform and predictable. And so to just kind of like completely open the book and say anything you want goes, I get emotional pushback from that concept. And so I think that's work that we can all do in terms of like at the farmers market, at the seed swaps, in the forums, is to kind of normalize diversity in food and farming systems so that it's actually an exciting adventure and not an intimidating what the hell's going on type of feeling. So I just wanted to share that at the end. Okay, I think we'll close it out there unless any of you guys have got final thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the WhatsApp group chat with other growers about the crops we were growing was really valuable. And looking for value around this work, I learned things about growing these crops that you don't really learn in books. Just like getting to share experiences with other growers in a very easy platform was really of value. And yeah, so thanks for having us be a part of this. And the other thing, there was something in the chat that I wanted to address really quickly. And it was like, how can you define crop diversity as it is being measured within the study? Basically, something that was doable for us about this project was like, I don't have to necessarily do the thing where I'm putting a bag over a closed flower and then coming at dawn to pollinate it just as it's opening, because I'm trying to get this very specific trait. Like you're just taking the best of the diversity at the end of the year, like your favorite plants, you just save from those ones. And there isn't this like really big logistical seed saving operation with a selection happening. The diversity is going to carry the quality forward, and in terms of growing quality and in like post-harvest quality. So that made it very approachable. And We could get into the weeds about, what does it mean, but it basically, this is a much easier version of seed saving is a takeaway, like the model that Chris has developed.
Thank you, Leonora. Okay, folks, I dropped my email and website in the chat, and you're welcome to reach out if you got follow-up questions or thoughts. And yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful and diverse growing season.
Thank you all.
Thank you.